Technology. So we've been recording these talks and putting them on YouTube, and we're going to try to videotape it today and see how this goes. There were a lot of people who couldn't make it for various reasons, so welcome to all of those folks. And again, thank you all for being here, and just the silence this morning has been really lovely. As I always say, just about whatever I say, take what you like, take what is applicable to you, helpful in your practice, and leave the rest. I'm just going to talk to you kind of out of my own practice, my own understanding. One of the things that I find helpful in my practice is to really be clear about what I'm working on in this practice. I have spent decades, literally, I've spent many years really just doing breath awareness by itself, with some understanding, thinking that like if I just do that like one day this switch will get thrown and I'll awaken and I'll understand it all. Don't do that. I can tell you that's probably not going to work. So I always try to kind of figure out, especially if I back off my practice, if I've not been doing it, if I fall away from meditation, a couple of things that I find helpful to get back on the horse is, one is I make the practice more difficult. So if I've been sitting 40 minutes a day and I fall off that, I say, okay, now you're going to sit for 60 minutes a day. And if that doesn't feel like enough, I'll sit 60 minutes twice a day. Just as, and again, what matters in something like that is the spirit with which it's done. That's not punitive, right? That's not my old Catholicism talking. You will pray. It's just a way that makes me lean in. And once I start doing that, sort of the momentum of the practice kicks back in. Another thing that I find really helpful is to really have a specific practice. If you don't at this moment, just something to do is kind of check in with what are the dominant themes in your life. What is the thing that you're working on most in your life? What's vexing you or what's working well? And then see if you can find a specific teaching that actually addresses that. And then if you're wonky about it, if you're interested in it, read up about that one thing as a way of informing your practice, right? If you remember, back in the day when the Buddha gave these teachings, these were wandering monks, and they would blow into a village and he would give some teachings and then that was it. Like, people were on their own with what they remembered. And so there was a really deep sense of self-reliance in this practice. So one of the things that I do when I first sit down is I take refuge in the three jewels, right? The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And those can be understood on different levels. On the most plain level is the Buddha, is the historical Buddha, 2,600 years ago, had his awakening, and then spent the next 45 years of his life teaching and systematizing this. The Dharma is often referred to as the teachings that he gave, and what a treasure they are. And then the Sangha is the community of contemplatives, both in your contemporary life right now, the group that's sitting here, you folks online, and then also historically, across time. One of the things that's so rich about this practice is, however lost you think you are, however bad at this you think you're convinced that you are, you can know that every single practitioner throughout time has had exactly those thoughts and feelings, and you're not alone. Like, every time you sit down, you are not alone. You are with that historic Sangha. I say to myself, the community of contemplatives across space and time are here with me now. It's so beautiful. So on that same level, if you think about the Buddha and his teachings, I've been thinking about this a lot, that like, the Buddha had this incredible experience, right, of awakening. And what he didn't then do was make himself a deity. He didn't say, oh, I am the possessor of this special knowledge, and you all had better bow down before me. What he did was he bypassed all of that. And what he recognized is this aspect of mind that I have realized, this awakened, and I'll talk more about this in a second. This is as much in you as it is in me. The only difference is that I have realized something. So that's another aspect of this, which is the awakened mind is here now. So then what the Buddha did is, instead of making this big complicated thing, he just spent the rest of his life trying to reach us by teaching, this is what I did, and this is what I discovered. And he gave those teachings according to who he was talking to. And there's literally thousands of teachings that the Buddha gave. But if you look at them, what they are maps. And they are all pointing to the same thing. The thing that's sacred is not the teachings, it's where they're pointing to, right? Don't mistake the finger pointing for the moon, right? George Carlin has a whole thing when you try to get your dog to look at the TV, the dog just looks at your hand. Then there is the Dharma on this level, is the body of the Buddha's teachings. And again, what's so amazing about them, unlike other historical teachings, is if you read the teachings of the Buddha, it sounds almost like they're so contemporary. They're like, it's as if he's talking right now. Like it's so plain and easy to understand. And then the third aspect is the Sangha, that, like people, millions of people have done this and are doing this. And you are not by yourself ever when you endeavor to practice. And you can rest in that knowledge that, I have a friend, I've told this story before, I love this, he's this truck driver, he's a big, tough guy, and he was very deeply into Tibetan Buddhism. And I asked him, how did you get into this? Right? Because that's another thing, right? It's just, well, I'll get into that in a second. But how did you get into this? Somebody had dragged him on a retreat, and there's a famous tanka, those paintings, those Tibetan, I think they're paintings that depict various, deities, Buddhas. And in that practice, you focus on these various deities and energies, and you bring them up in yourself. But there's this one tanka, maybe you've seen it. It's of all the Buddhas throughout time, and there's just this. It's just row after 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 row, and then there's this one little Buddha in the center at the bottom. And that Buddha represents the teacher that's in front of you now. And this truck driver, this big, tough guy, just when he was telling the story, he just broke down. And he said, I was on this retreat, and I was listening to this guy that I didn't understand, and I suddenly saw that tanka. I just saw that, and it was alive in the sky in front of me. So Tibetan, this, right? But he said, I just saw the whole thing, and to realize that all of those people had dedicated their lives and passed on this knowledge one to the next, to the next, to the next, until I could be sitting here in front of that guy and hear what they heard. Who am I to say no to that? This practice does not ask you to have faith. It doesn't ask you to believe in anything. It just says, come do the practice and see for yourself. see what happens. And if you're like me, what happens is you do this practice and you do see what happens. Your life starts to change. And it can sort of come at you from the side, like something will happen and you won't react in the way that you used to react. And you know in that moment that what you just did isn't who you usually are. And you go, oh, that's the practice. That's the practice finding purchase and expression in my life. That then becomes faith, right? That then brings me back to the practice to say, oh, I want to go more in that direction. That feels good. I like this person I am. My relationships are much more successful when I'm doing this practice. So my faith is born of experience, not of, okay, you need to surrender your intelligence and believe in this sky God, and believe in this whole theory. And your measure of faith is the degree to which you're willing to surrender your own intelligence. It's exactly the opposite. And again, sorry, Jesus, but coming from my Catholic background and, the battle I had to get out from all of that, this was really important to me. This made it really helpful. So that's one level. The other thing that I do when I sit down and I practice and I take refuge is I look at the three jewels this way, that the Buddha is representative of the awakened mind that is already here now in me, in all of you. Again, that's what the Buddha said, is the mind that he awakened, the mind that he realized was not his. It's mind. It's fundamental to our human nature. All he was able to do, not all, with a capital A, all he did, all that guy did was unobscure it. And that's what I'm asking, or that's rather what I am endeavoring to do every time that I sit down to meditate, to practice unobfuscating, if that's a word, right, is clarifying the awakened mind that's already here. And it's really helpful, I'll come back to that as well. The awakened mind is already here. What is the awakened mind? The awakened mind is awareness devoid of the overlay of conceptual thought. The awakened mind is pure awareness, unborn, uncreated, the deathless mind. It's in me, it's in you, it is intrinsic to nature. It is obscured in my human experience because of this mind and the habit of this mind, karma, if you want to go that far, inherited karma, cultural karma, all of these things that make me, out of habit, out of ignorance to the way things actually are, that I so identify with the conceptual mind, my thoughts, my beliefs, my feelings, my insights, my analytical acumen. I am so identified with that I mistake it for reality. All of us have had experiences of the absolute mind piercing through that veil, whether it's a beautiful sunset, the smile of a baby looking up at you, something. Sometimes it can be tragic. I was thinking this morning, that experience of being at a funeral, somebody you really love, and looking by at the cars going by on the road and wondering, how can life be going on? And it's like that. Because suddenly this meaning and my relationship to this person and the scale of who they've been in my life, and how is it possible that life goes on? Because truly, Jack, all that you are caught up in is the conceptual mind's overlay of what has happened. Somebody was here and now they're not. And all those people driving by are caught up in their own world, their own drama. Got to get someplace. Really busy. I'm so important. I got to get there because I got to make the thing happen that's going to... And your life will go by. So the awakened mind is here, and then what does the awakened mind awaken to? Dhamma, which is the way that it is. Life as it is now. Life as it is without the overlay of thought, without my constant opinion making, my judgment, my feelings about things, my preferences, my likes, my dislikes. The awakened mind awakens to the way things are. And this is often a place where newcomers, novices get stuck. Is you come to meditation and you think, well, I'm supposed to then stop having preferences. I'm supposed to stop this mind from thinking. I'm supposed to stop judging. And people find, like, I can't do that, therefore I can't meditate. And it's like, no, you're just understanding it wrong. You're not trying to stop your mind from doing what the mind does. I tell people, think of your thinking as the exhaust of the engine of your brain and nervous system. It's just the it's the output. You don't have to control it. You just have to see it. Because when you're seeing it, you're disidentified. There's subject and object. There are the thoughts, and then there's the one who is knowing the thoughts. But you don't have to go into them. They're not personal to you. So the awakened mind, the Buddha mind, awakens to Dhamma the way it is. And when those two things happen, Sangha arises. And Sangha can be understood as intimacy. Intimacy with all things. When the awakened mind awakens to the way it is, there is no barrier between me and this life. There is no separation between me and you, good and bad, up and down. There is an unguarded open-heartedness, undefended, direct experience of whatever is being known here now. That level of intimacy, because we all know intimacy, we are born of intimacy, not only physically, but psychologically. In attachment theory, we say there's no such thing as a baby. There is always a baby and someone else. The only way for a baby to recognize that they are is through the loving gaze of someone looking at them. That's how we know we exist. Without that, this is why solitary confinement is torture. Because when you don't have eyes on you, you go mad. You don't know who you are. We are constantly, in the stream of life, we are constantly calibrating who we are in each given moment, not only by the karmic patterns that we carry, the familial patterns that we carry, but how we are being interacted with in a given moment. Our nervous system, I always say, I do a lot of couples therapy, and I always say, one of the things partners have to get is they have to get how sensitive they are to each other. They're in conflict because each one is embedded in their conception of how the relationship should be, what needs to happen to make this relationship work. And they're pounding each other with it. They don't recognize that, except that they see that the relationship doesn't work. Yeah, but if you would just listen to me, if I could just explain what you're doing that isn't working, then you wouldn't do that thing. And we would be, that's the longing. That's the heart longing that underlies the conflict of the relationship. And typically when one person is really vocal and they want to explain, the other person is like, oh my gosh, here we go again. My partner's going to tell me, here we go again. And what they don't see is that when they're doing that, it's terrifying their partner. Why are you doing, what's in that move when you make that move? Oh, I don't want to hear it again. Because I'm convinced that when I hear my partner complaining about the way that I'm being, what is the signal that I'm getting? The signal that I'm getting is that I'm failing and that I'm not who he or she or they need me to be. And how do I deal with that pain? By trying to get away from it. But partners can't see that they're doing this at first. So one of the things that helps them is I say to them, your nervous system is this sensitive. If you, partner A, are in the kitchen and you are cutting carrots, thinking about your day, and you hear partner B come in the door, in the other room, drop their wallet and keys and take their jacket off, your nervous system has already calibrated exactly who's going to walk around that corner. You are already anticipating, because this is what the brain does. The brain forecasts what's going to happen next. It's a survival mechanism. It projects it predicts what's going to happen next. And by the sound of your keys in that door, my nervous system has already calibrated, be on guard, or not. That's the fight or flight mechanism, and it's that sensitive. And it's only when we start to recognize that we are actually that sensitive, that we are sending these signals to each other all of the time, that we start to be able to pivot off of our entrenched positions and start to become a little bit more flexible. Because this is the thing, I'll work with a couple, they've been married 30 years, but what they are incapable of doing actually is truly being vulnerable with each other. Most of us have never had vulnerability modeled. You came from a family, you had to survive it, and God knows everybody was doing the best they could or not, whatever your story is. But I always get this when I talk to people, I say, I want to talk about your family of origin, and they say, oh, I've been in therapy forever and I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm done with that. And I understand, because it's frustrating when you've analyzed your family and you've come up with 10,000 concepts about how you grew up and what did and didn't happen that worked for you or didn't work for you. And that story has availed you nothing. That's the booby prize of therapy. Insight. Oh, I understand more. Because it doesn't translate into change. In the 12-step program Jim was mentioning earlier, they call it the well-polished turd, right? A well-analyzed problem is exactly that. So we're actually looking for something else to happen. So when I talk to people about their families of origin, I'm not interested in the grand story. I'm actually interested in your understanding of how your family functioned. And what role did you play in that? What were the roles? What were the rules, explicit and implicit? And how did you navigate that? What was that like for you? Because I guarantee you those lessons that you learned in their early life, you are still absolutely playing out. And they are in your most intimate relationships. Another idea that's really helpful is that you're never going to excise these things to where they are gone. You are who you are, and under the right circumstances, no matter how enlightened you become, you never rise above being human. And under the right circumstances, you will default instantaneously back to whatever survival strategy, whatever way of being you created in your early life. Talking about this in this way, because that is hardwired into our neurobiology. It is not a question of thought. It is how we are wired to the most important people in our lives, whether they are alive today or gone. My parents are both gone, but I am still in relationship to them because I carry them inside me. And those relationships are actually ongoing. They're constantly being renegotiated. This past year, my mother died a year ago, April, and I had probably one of the most profound awakenings within that first year of her death. And I won't go into the whole story about it, but it was suddenly like the schema of my life, my experience of my own identity kind of shifted. And part of my personality, like a glacier, just calved and fell off. And I suddenly saw something that I'd been acting out in every intimate romantic relationship I've ever had. I suddenly saw it and how it had come from my relationship with my mother, that I'd been carrying this pattern, enacting this pattern for a whole host of reasons, that was perpetuating my own suffering and perpetuating the suffering of those poor women who tried to love me. Everybody doing their best, acting out of patterns that they can't even see. All the while up in the unsolvable Rubik's Cube of our minds, trying to figure it out, right? Trying to figure it out. And that always brings me back to practice. What are we becoming liberated from? These patterns that I'm talking about are so deep, and you have your version of them. Of course you do. What does liberation from that actually look like? Well, again, my understanding and the way that I work with it is step out of the binary that says I can only be awakened once I have purified my being in this way. I don't think it actually works that way. The awakened mind is here now. There is a lasting happiness that is not contingent on the circumstances of your life. So many people today, right, we have such anxiety and so much depression, in part because we're inundated with this fire hose of the most disturbing news from all quarters, locally, nationally, internationally. Our nervous systems can't offset that. And you look at what's happening to the biosphere, and you look at the wars, and you look at our political system, and it's just like, how could you not want to just crawl under a rock? But this practice says the world is still beautiful. This life is beautiful and precious. And the conditions of your time, whether they be to your liking or not, that beauty, that pure love is not contingent on these circumstances. There is real tragedy happening in our world. There may be real tragedy happening in your life. But this practice, this awakened mind, is right here now. So how do I do that? How do I realize that? I have to get very clear about what I'm working with in meditation. And for me, it is outing the conceptual mind. Every time I become aware of what I am thinking, of what I am feeling, of what is being known, to be mindful in a way that is helpful is right in that moment to be able to pause and recognize, oh yeah, this is an experience being known. And what do I know about all experience, all sensory experience? 3 characteristics. It's impermanent. This thought that I'm thinking, these feelings that I'm feeling, they weren't here a moment ago. Circumstances changed and conspired, and these thoughts and feelings arose. Hang in there long enough, circumstances will change, and they will change again. Because of that changeability, they are not sources of lasting happiness. They cannot give you what you want. All we want is that stability of heart and mind. Think about it when you eat a piece of chocolate cake, or if you have a cocktail at the end of a day. Oh, that's what you were looking for, right? It's not really about the cake, it's that oh, right? Or that cocktail, that first drink, oh, right? Well, if one feels good, let's have 80, right? Let's eat the whole chocolate cake. And then you're like, oh no, disgusting. Get it away from me, right? So attraction becomes aversion. Then what? Oh, I gotta lay down. Oh, yeah, no, I gotta just stay, right? It's the carrot that we're constantly chasing. All sensory experience is impermanent. No sensory experience has the capacity to bring you lasting happiness. And thirdly, no sensory experience belongs to you. It's not you. You can't hold a feeling, right? It breaks my heart when I hear people talk about, their self-affirmations. That self-affirmation lasts as long as you're saying it in the bathroom mirror, right? But by the time you've left, I am an important person and I'm worthy and I have a voice and I deserve to be heard. By the time you've moved to the coffee maker, right, you're back in. No, you're not. You're not worth anything. And then the torture of that, I got to get back on the horse of my thinking mind. I got to get this whole apparatus aligned to where I feel good, and it's just a setup for perpetual suffering. And this practice offers a way out of the whole thing. But then that becomes scary in its own right. Because to what degree are you willing to sacrifice or break allegiance with your conceptual mind? If I recognize my anxiety that I used to be identified with and struggled with, and I go, oh, this is just phenomena being known in the mind. This is just an object that's here right now. I'm not anxious all the time. But when circumstances conspire, up comes anxiety. And I recognize, it's impermanent and it's not a lasting source of happiness and it's actually not mine. Same with depression. Same with your views about the Middle East. Same with your views about artificial intelligence. What's the thing you're torturing with yourself with today, right? None of these things have that capacity. So when you start to let go of, you start to see through anxiety or depression, and you go, this is wonderful. This practice is really working. That feels great. But what about your idea of yourself as a good parent? What about that idea you hold of yourself as a decent person? As a man, identified as a man or as a woman, or not either, or straight or gay. It's like, how much of your sense of you and where you draw that sense of self from are you actually willing to let go? Then you start to get a sense, or I do anyway, in this practice of the stakes, that really what's at stake. I'll say this, I'm sorry I've gone over time a little bit. Am I okay? Yeah, I'm going a little long. Am I? It's lunchtime, so you're like, yeah, you are. I wanted to read a poem. I'll read the poem. This kind of says what I was about to just try to articulate. It's called, "It Was Like This, You Were Happy." It's by Jane Hirshfield. It was like this. You were happy, then you were sad, then you were happy again, then not. It went on. You were innocent, or you were guilty. Actions were taken, or not. At times you spoke, at other times you were silent. Mostly, it seems, you were silent. What could you say? Now it is almost over. Like a lover, your life bends down and kisses your life. It does this not in forgiveness. Between you, there is nothing to forgive. But with the simple nod of a baker at the moment he sees the bread is finished with transformation. Eating, too, is a thing now only for others. It doesn't matter what they will make of you or your days, they will be wrong. They will miss the wrong woman, miss the wrong man. All the stories they tell will be tales of their own invention. Your story was this: you were happy, then you were sad. You slept, you awakened. Sometimes you ate roasted chestnuts, sometimes persimmons. Thank you.